podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kill, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
Good morning, gentlemen.
What is up?
How are you doing?
I'm good. We are one day away from opening day.
That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Of course, if you're a Dodgers fan like me, you've already had opening day.
It's true. That was weird. I'm be honest, I loved it, but it was weird that they played it like a week and a half before.
It was opening. So in full transparency, 162 games.
Yes.
I will watch every single game. All 162. The only ones that I will maybe miss is against Atlanta and Cincinnati because MLB TV blocks those. They're blacked out in our market here. Even though I've never understood that because we're in East Tennessee. Atlanta is 5 hours in one direction. Cincinnati is 5 hours in the other direction. And we're just a geographical oddity right here that everything gets blocked out for that. We also get blocked out in Charlotte, which is 3 hours in a completely different direction. Not that Charlotte has a Major League Baseball team.
No, but they do it with basketball if you get the NBA ticket.
Which I do, yeah.
I don't get the NBA. I do get for like $10. I get the MLB pass.
So we will time it. We've already time stamped ourselves already this episode. And we were talking with Terry before we hit record and saying sometimes we go down little rabbit trails in the beginning here. We made it 5 seconds before we went down a rabbit trail.
I mean, we haven't talked in we haven't recorded in like 3 weeks.
I know it's been a while. So for our listeners, now we've really time stamped ourselves. That I was gone on vacation last week, and I know that's right after I was just gone on a basketball
on vacation.
Trust me, that was not a vacation. Putting me in a church camp with a leaky roof with 11 high school boys that have played basketball all week and not showered. That is not a vacation.
Smells like my house most days.
It does. Yeah.
three boys showering. They do shower.
But so anyways, I was on vacation last week, and it was opening day for the Dodgers in Korea, and their game started at 6 a.m. So vacation is normally a time for you to rest and relax and sleep in a little bit. Not for me and my son. We were up at 6 a.m. 2 of the 3 days that we were there to watch our beloved Dodgers take 1 of 2 in a game in Seoul, Korea.
And they had to come back in the one.
Game 1, it was a great game.
And so,
But it is the most wonderful time of the year. We have March Madness taking place. We have opening day of baseball that is less than 24 hours away. And it is just a glorious time to be alive. The NBA season is wrapping up. Spring is sprung. And we have Easter Sunday coming up this week.
We do have Easter Sunday. I might as well just, we're already there. Just, slide all the way in.
Yep.
Timestamp everything.
That's where we're at. Bruce, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. If I could ever get all the things you lined up for me to do with microphones and things like that to work. You got to remember how old I am and that my computer is modern. I'm not.
Bruce, the struggle is if we remember how old you are, it reminds us of how old we're getting. And so we can't do that. We have to stay young. So you have to stay young. So we're just going to keep dropping all the technology on you, man. You're going to kill it.
So this past week, my family and I were
in one studio.
We would love to have you in the studio here with us, Bruce. That would take care of all of this. You should just start joining us in the studio. So as I was saying, last week I was on vacation with my family. We went to Williamsburg, Virginia, the historical triangle, the birthplace of this great country of ours. And we had a wonderful time. We did Colonial Williamsburg, where you're walking around with all of these people that are in historical garb, and everything is either original to the 1700s or recreated from the 1700s. But then we also spent some time. We bought what they call a spring bounce pass that gave us 7 consecutive days of open open, I was going to say enrollment. I've been doing so many college applications with my daughter. Open
access.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's the word. For Colonial Williamsburg and Busch Gardens.
Busch Gardens. Cool.
Yeah. And
I love Busch Gardens.
So we spent a couple of days at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg there, and we went on Saturday. We got to our vacation on Friday, and on Saturday we tackled Busch Gardens, and it was absolutely packed. I mean, completely packed. You're talking hour and a half, 2 hour long wait for every ride. And so we didn't stay very long because we had this bounce pass that we could get in every day. So we left after a few hours. We come back on Sunday and things were a little bit better, 30, 45-minute wait for each ride, much more manageable, less crowded in the park, felt really good. We stayed for a while. But then we went back on Thursday. Thursday, we had the park to ourselves. At least it felt like it. We were walking on to every single ride. So in the matter of like 5-6 hours, we rode every roller coaster about 4 or 5 times. It was incredible. We just walked the park again and again and again, just jumping right on to every ride. And by the time that it was done, we felt like we had been Top Gun, that I just, my G-forces, my equilibrium was so completely off because we had ridden so many roller coasters in such a short amount of time. And for me, as a father and growing old and seeing my body not quite react to getting out of bed the way that it used to when I was younger, riding a roller coaster is about as extreme as I get. That gets my blood pressure going. It gets the adrenaline pumping. But our guest today is an adrenaline junkie. This is a guy who roller coasters to him are like
Sunday afternoon nap.
Walk in the park. Yeah, Sunday afternoon nap. This guy has a resume of extreme activities and adventures that he should have his own show on ESPN or Hulu. And so we want to welcome into the Small Church Podcast, Terry Thompson. Terry, how are you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing great, Tony. Glad to be with you. I was just in at Magic Kingdom and rode their new roller coaster, Tron. And it was a great one. 0 to 60 in the first couple of seconds that you're on it.
Wow.
So you would love that one.
I would love that one. I was at Magic Kingdom when they were building Tron and they were taking it through test runs, but haven't had a chance to hop on those light bikes yet and give that a shot. So Terry, we're just going to get real serious right now. We're going to jump right out of the gate and start this thing. What is your all-time favorite roller coaster?
Oh, wow. I'm favorite. Tron was pretty cool because that was the first time I'd been on it. Space Mountain's always a winner because, it's iconic and it's in the dark. So, yeah, we always said we were just at Animal Kingdom. We went to Everest. So we like doing the signature roller coasters at these different parks.
Robert, do you have a favorite roller coaster?
I agree. Space Mountain's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of Six Flags Over Georgia Superman. When they take somehow and you get all the G's going one way and kind of in the movie, he flips and they push you the other way really quick with all that force and then they roll you back out of it. That's just been really, really cool to me. And then just being older and my dad had gone to Six Flags and stuff like that. The Scream Machine, just this rickety wooden roller coaster that just, you feel like it may be closed by now. I haven't been to Six Flags in years, but like you feel like it should have been closed 20 years ago and it's still just going and doing. And it's really, that was a fun ride.
It is a fun ride. I've been on that one many, many years ago. I think that a lot of times church life can feel a lot like a roller coaster. That there are some times when you're throwing your hands up and you're along for the ride and it feels like things are great. And then other times it feels like you're spinning out of control. And your equilibrium's all thrown off and you're just praying and hoping that this thing will come to a stop sometime soon. And Terry, you have spent the last several years of your life working in the church and for the church, working with churches from all over. Can you give us just a little bit of your background, your history, and how you got started with you launched an organization called Small Church USA. You're also a local pastor. Can you just kind of give us a little bit of your background and what all you've done and are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a youth pastor for 12 years in Indianapolis, Indiana, and always thought that would be my lifelong calling because I'm just a big kid. And my wife says I have the Peter Pan syndrome. I never want to grow up. And so youth ministry was a blast because you just get to have fun all the time. But then I grew up and went into an associate pastor for 2 years in Columbus, Ohio. And then God called us to this small community of Crawfordsville, Indiana, which is in west central Indiana. It's about 15,000 people. And my first lead pastor position was a church of 20 elderly people. That the average age was 64 years old, and the church had been in steady decline for 10 years. And so that's what I walked into when I was 35 years old, before the word revitalization was even really kind of a word, and didn't know what I was doing. So came in here and thought, well, this church has been unhealthy for about 10 years. Let's see if we can get it healthy. And so we just started working and doing what we could to get the church moving again and give it a little energy and a little life. And if you fast forward 24 years down the road, that little church of 20 people now runs 1,000 people on Sunday morning. And God has done immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine in this little town of Crawfordsville, Indiana. And that kind of spurred me on to say, okay, what God has done here, can we help other people with that? And we've had a lot of pastors and churches reach out to us over those 24 years and saying, how'd you do the revitalization? Can you help us? And we did what we could with the bandwidth that we had, which wasn't a lot. But then we decided to do a succession plan. And a couple of years ago, I handed the church off to a next generation pastor and did a succession plan and started Small Church USA so that we could, on a very intentional basis and in a much broader context, help all these pastors and churches that have been reaching out to us and really try to give them some intentional help with a process for how to get their church healthy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. And so how long have you been doing Small Church USA? When did you start that?
Yeah, we formed it in 2019. COVID actually, for all the bad that was about COVID, it actually helped us because it gave me about 3 months to really start putting materials and putting things together. And so we've been doing this now for 2.5 years probably, and helped about 100 churches that have gone through our year-long engagement.
That's great. That's 100 churches in just a couple of years. That's really incredible. That's really amazing. So one of the things that I want to start off with you on is in our conversation that we had a couple of months ago, and even so far today, you've used this word urgency a lot of times. It just kept coming up, urgency in revitalization. What does urgency mean within the context of church revitalization to you?
Yeah, so I think there's 4 steps to revitalization, and in fact, I'm just finishing my manuscript for putting this into a book. But step 1 is that crisis heightens urgency. Step 2 is urgency seeks hope. Step 3 is hope drives strategy, and step 4 is strategy reveals leadership. And so step 1 is crisis heightens urgency. Because if there is no urgency and if there's no realization that the church is in a crisis, then nobody will do anything about it. And a crisis is defined as a difficult or dangerous time in which a solution is needed and quickly. And I think where the urgency comes in. And the other part of the definition of a crisis is this. It's a stage in a sequence of events in which the trajectory of all future events, especially for better or worse, is determined. So when a church gets into a crisis, what they do at that moment of the crisis will like be the set the trajectory for where that church is going to go in the days and years to come. And if there is no urgency in the church, then like nothing gets addressed and nothing gets moving forward to address the crisis. So that's where I think the urgency comes in and why it's so important.
Yeah, I mean that thought, that crisis heightens urgency. I guess I'm wondering, like, what were you seeing so clearly in churches that just brought that? Because I'm a small church pastor, like it's 100 people. We're in a town of 6,000 and doing that. Like, how did that crisis? I mean, I guess for you all seeing that, because I'm living it on some levels. How did you all kind of really drive that home to start helping small church pastors like myself and others to really kind of see that urgency inside of the crisis?
Yeah, everything comes from the top leader down, right? So everything rises and falls on leadership. And so when a church is in a crisis mode, and they don't always see it, because a lot of churches think, well, our doors are open on Sunday and we can pay the bills and, all those kind of things. But that doesn't mean the church isn't in a crisis. And so it's the job of the leader to actually raise the bar and help the people understand that if the trajectory that we're on currently doesn't change, where are we going to be in the next 5 years or 10 years? Sometimes that helps people realize the urgency to do something now instead of kicking that can down the road further.
No, that's a great thought there. I heard Derwin Gray the other day say something along those lines of like, if our church isn't changing the community, should we even exist? And that's that. I think some of that leadership thing you're talking about in the pastor of like, man, seeing the fact of that we may not exist if we don't change our focus and our purpose. And that definitely creates that urgency. No, that's fantastic.
Terry, one of the things that I see in my work with small churches and small church pastors is a lot of times they don't see the crisis until it's too late. They're past a breaking point, and oftentimes the leader of the church, you said that it starts from the top down, that the lead pastor of the church or one of the key leaders in the church begins to understand this crisis, this sense of urgency that they have within the church. But the rest of the people in the church, the congregation, doesn't sense that. And even when trying to explain that to them or trying to make them aware of what needs to happen, the church doesn't want to see that. They either don't believe that, or they just simply don't see that there's an urgency, that there's a need, that there's a crisis that's taking place. How can, for one of our listeners who's out there, maybe multiple listeners who are out there listening right now that are saying, yeah, I see that our church desperately needs this revitalization. We need something to change. We're in a crisis, and I sense the sense of urgency, but no one else in my church does. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, the one thing that usually breaks my heart more than anything else is when I get, somebody from a church, a deacon, church members, whatever, reach out to me at small church, and they're like, hey, our church is dying. Our church needs help. We're stuck. We're status quo, whatever that looks like. And then they say, we've asked our pastor to do something, but he won't. And that breaks my heart, because if pastor doesn't want to do it, it's not going to go anywhere. I usually call that like court appointed counseling, right? like somebody has to do something. They don't want to do it. They're not going to do it. So I think, again, it starts at the top, and the pastor's got to be willing to lead, challenge the status quo of what's there, and have a strategic plan for exactly how to do that and what that's going to look like. And that's what we try to help pastors with, because a lot of times they come to us and they're just like, hey, I'm stuck. We're status quo. We're in decline, but I don't know what to do next. And I don't think it's that pastors don't want to do something. I think a lot of times they're just not sure what to do.
Do you find in that space, that's a great, like, they want to do something, they know what to do. Do you find, I guess, in 100 churches over the last 2.5, 3 years, are you finding that a lot of pastors, because I know that I'm guilty of looking at the bigger churches, or not even, well, I mean, a lot of times they're bigger because they have the resources to do things, but you find a church that's clicking and things are just really, really going well. And you're going, man, I'm going to grab that model and drag it in. Are you finding that when pastors are facing these bumps, that with the internet and so many resources and so much access, instead of maybe stepping back, praying, looking at their situation, their community, their town, the needs that are there, that they're even looking at their buddy across town or looking at somebody else and trying to grab just these random thoughts and make that their strategy instead of really doing the work to develop what God needs them to do in their church?
Yeah. The, revitalization, it's not a one size fits all, right? There's no program that's going to be like, hey, do this, and it's the magic pixie dust and everything's going to be great. Every church is different in its context, right? So the pastors are all different. The members are different. The community's different. The needs are different. I mean, all of those kind of things. So it really is something that does take work. I mean, a revitalization project is probably a commitment of 3 to 5 years to really do a good, healthy evaluation to see what's not clicking well. And then in the context of that church, how do we get tools, resources, best practices applied to get things moving in a healthy direction and get the church going? So, yes, I would agree with you 100%. You can't just grab what somebody else is doing and make it fit for you because the context is completely different in every church around the country.
And revitalization is so different than planting. And I think that sometimes pastors lose that. And so when you're talking there, there's so many things that are inspiring me and some stuff that I'm going through right now that I'm going, man, okay, I need to take a step back. I need to reevaluate and move forward stronger with the team more aligned. But there's some stuff too I'm trying to remember as well. Like we've been around for 10 years. We're not a brand new church plant. We're a church that's, a healthy, growing church, but there's things we need to evaluate. So,
yeah, Terry, I want to dive into a little bit of your personal side of things. One of the things that I was really excited about talking to you about was your extreme sports activities that you're a part of. And I used a horrible metaphor at the beginning of our show about how ministry life can be a lot like a roller coaster. And in a lot of times to lead through these revitalization processes, it takes a special kind of leader. It takes someone uniquely wired in a way that can handle the pushback that they're going to face, that can handle the extreme ups and downs that come with any kind of change that's taking place. What have you seen in how a leader needs to be made up? What does their DNA need to be? What are some key characteristics that they need to have if they're going to lead their congregation through a revitalization process?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, I probably was a little bit more wired for this because, like I said, I've jumped out of airplanes. I've been to the Amazon jungle. I've driven 10 laps around the Daytona International Speedway going 160 miles an hour. I love that kind of stuff. I love a challenge. And so I think when you're talking about revitalization, it has to be like what you got to understand is that it is a faith and it is going to take risk. And one of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis is this: the way to know you are living by faith is that what you're doing for God scares you. And if it doesn't, there is no faith involved. And when you walk into, something that like, oh man, like we got to turn this thing around. It's going to be a faith journey it's going to involve risk because you're going to challenge the status quo. And so you've got to be willing to go, hey, we're going to try some things. Not everything's going to work. And if it doesn't, we won't do it again, but let's not be afraid to try. And I just think that's part of the culture that a church has to have, going through revitalization, that doing nothing is not an option. Let's try something, right? And let's do it with as much calculated risk as we can, but we know it's going to be risky and we're going to have to give it a shot. So I think the faith and risk factor and being willing to challenge the status quo and know you're going to get some pushback on that is just part of the equation of what you're going to do when you go into that situation.
Yeah, when I was leading through a really challenging, difficult time at a church that I was the pastor of several years ago, I had on my phone, my wallpaper when I opened up was Joshua 1:9. And so every time I opened my phone, it said, "Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Like, I need that reminder 80 times a day as we're leading through this, having critical conversations, meeting after meeting after meeting with people, trying to get them on board to a vision that they didn't want to go with. And there was a lot of pushback, and just that constant reminder, be strong and courageous. God will be with you wherever you go. He's leading you. He's guiding you. So that's great. I love that. How have you seen it personally that you've been able to lead? I mean, going from a church of 20 to a church of 1,000, which technically we shouldn't even have you on our show, because this is the Small Church Podcast, and your church clearly broke all of those barriers of growth to be a church of over 1,000. And so I'm not sure that you might have disqualified yourself. So we probably could just end this conversation right now. But how did you see, through all of those different barriers of church growth and all of the different crucial conversations that you had to have with people along the way, how did you persevere through that and keep going and keep pushing and fighting through all of those different barriers that were put up?
Yeah. One of my most recent favorite quotes is a guy by the name of Marty Linsky, and he said this: leadership is about disappointing your own people at a rate they can absorb. And I love that quote because
that's so good.
Because part of moving forward is you have to challenge what's there if you're going to keep going. And but the leader part of it is you have to do that at a rate that people can absorb. Like, you got to know when to push, how hard to push, when to take your foot off the gas, those kind of things. But anytime you change, right? Change is always hard for anybody, because change means that you're going to lose something that you've had in the past that might be special to you. And so even if it's a good change is still hard for people. But the leader's job is to go, hey, but if we're going to get to this next step, we need to do these kind of things. And so it's a matter of really strategically leading with a plan about what's the next step. When we get to here, what are we going to do next? And then you've got to be willing to pull the trigger, knowing that it's not going to make everybody happy.
Yeah, we had a church. I've told this story a couple of times on our show, that we had a church several years ago that we were working with that brought us in to help them with a revitalization process. And in some of our initial meetings, we were sitting down and just getting to understand the culture of the church and their community and where they were at. And it came to a point where we said, you guys are going to have to make some changes that you don't like if you want to reach the people that you're not reaching and that you need to currently reach. And they just looked at us with blank faces. And so finally, after what felt like several hours of discussion that was really kind of one-sided, we posed a proposition to them. We said, you guys have two options. You can either do some things that you personally are not going to like, but theologically still align with everything that you believe. Just, it's not what you would choose to do, but it's going to reach your community and reach the people that you're desperately wanting to reach. You can do that. And you can see some things begin to change in your church community, in your congregation. Or you can continue to do exactly what you're doing right now, which are all the things that you guys want to do, that you think are the proper way to do things. And 10 years from now, your church won't exist. So we can either help you to make some of these changes and go through those processes, or we can help you guys plan your funeral. And I will never forget it. Bruce, I think you were actually in the meeting for this, that they all looked around at each other and said, we choose option 2. We would like for you to help us plan our funeral. And they just weren't willing to step out of what made them feel comfortable, what made them feel like needed to be done, which was what they were already doing, which was leading them to death, to make the changes necessary, to have the hard conversations, to do the difficult things, to take those steps to revitalize their congregation.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, and Terry, you can probably speak to this way better than I can. The thing that I see in so many churches is that they were so healthy and so strong and so vibrant in a season of their church. And I think sometimes, and I'm not talking about styles of music. I'm not talking about whether you preach in a hoodie or preach in a coat and tie. I'm not talking about all those things. It's just, how do you serve the community? How do you care for the community? And that engaging culture without becoming part of culture is something that gets to be a blurry line for people that I don't think they understand that, man, I can actually take some steps forward and serve our community, love our community, and care for our community better with the gospel, still keeping that at the forefront, and not compromise what I feel like my parents believed or my grandparents believed or my great-grandparents who planted this church in 1845 or whatever. And that's just a hard line. I'm watching that at several churches that I'm around right now, just watching them struggle with, how do we stay exactly the same that we were in 1974 in 2024 and reach people like we did in 1974. And I don't know how,
Yeah, and I think what's difficult with that is that oftentimes you have people that were around for that. And so they experienced that movement of the Holy Spirit. They experienced that time of great excitement and energy and fruit within their church. And just a slow creep, a slow decline. They haven't noticed it until, like we said earlier, maybe it's too late. So, Terry, what are some things that you would say are signs that churches couldn't look out for, that our listeners sitting here right now saying, well, our church used to be this, but now we're this? What are some things that they can be looking for that are indicators that maybe they're heading down a negative trajectory?
Yeah, and I love that conversation because I think it's all spot on that, unhealthy things that don't change over a sustained period of time will eventually die, right? It's true of plants, animals, organizations, people, churches, whatever. And so understanding that, things have to change. It's change or die. And I don't think our theology ever changes because it doesn't need a new strategy. But theology doesn't change, but strategy needs to change. And I think that's where sometimes people blur those lines of, well, if we do something different, we are compromising our theology. And I don't think that would be the case at all. And that strategy is important. I think if a church doesn't have, and listen, the mission of the church is the Great Commission, right? So when we do evaluations with churches, one of the things that they have to evaluate is how their church is doing with really the four main key priorities of a church: preaching, prayer, evangelism, and the multiplication of leaders or discipleship. How are you doing in what Christ was about and the early church was about? And when churches come back after evaluating where they think they're the strongest and where they need the most help, most churches come back and say evangelism and discipleship are the two things that we need to do the most. So if the church has lost its mission of how are we doing with evangelism and how are we doing with discipleship, obviously that's a key indicator that the church isn't healthy. And then the second thing I would say is there some type of a strategic plan for moving the church forward other than we just do church every Sunday? And I think a lot of pastors and churches, that's where they get stalled. Because I know, like for me, when I went through my 4 years of Bible college training and all of that, like I never had one class on leadership. I had classes on how to study the Bible, how to preach the Bible, but never had anything on leadership, on how to lead anything. And I think that's the missing piece that we see with a lot of pastors is I just don't know what to do. And so that strategic plan and that strategy piece, I think, is missing a lot of times. And if it's not there, I think that's an indicator that the church needs some help in some areas of health of the church.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
I was going to say, so you've recognized that your church needs help. Now what? You said you have to have a strategy. What are some practical strategies that a church leader out there who's saying, okay, I've identified our need. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, step number one, and it's part of urgency, is just having a good way to evaluate whether or not the church is healthy and what areas need help. Because without a good evaluation plan, you can't really identify areas that need help, and then you can't figure out ways to solve them that are measurable and all of that to know if you're actually making progress. And so a good evaluation plan, I think, is critical to having a strategic plan. And here's like another one of my favorite leadership phrases. When clarity is low, anxiety is high. And when anxiety is high, performance is low. So if a church doesn't know where they're going, all that does is raise anxiety because everybody goes, okay, we need to do something, but nobody knows what to do. And so when clarity is low, anxiety is high. And then anytime people are anxious, the performance always goes down. So what do they need to do? They need a good strategic plan for how do we get things moving forward. And as soon as the people know that there's something happening, what we've seen in the churches we work with, man, that just energizes the base to go, oh, we're actually going to do something. And the church gets some momentum and some energy back because something is actually happening.
Man, that is like a quote machine here. Like I have taken so many notes. I haven't heard the clarity in a while, but that is a fantastic quote. And just C.S. Lewis and Larry, these leaderships about challenging your people. This is really inspiring today. Can I the same path? Can I shift a little bit though? Like the mission statement for you guys, and just kind of what you all talk about is you're encouraging and strengthening pastors, wives, and churches to revitalize health. As a pastor who has a wife that journeys very closely alongside, that cares deeply about what we do, that is fantastic that you guys acknowledge that early on and put that in, because I don't think a lot of organizations put that in there. It is clearly and concisely that way. But what are some steps and things that you guys are doing to come alongside pastors' wives to encourage them, to equip them and support them as they and their husbands and the other leaders are revitalizing churches?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's a piece of the whole puzzle of a healthy church that gets missed a lot of times is our pastors' wives. And my wife Kelly and I, we recognize that, and we actually over COVID shutdown wrote a book for pastors' wives called The Pastor's Wife Survival Playbook, because we knew as we were going into this thing that was one of the targets that we wanted to make sure we hit. And so all the guys that engage with us, they all get that book, and hopefully it encourages their wives. But one of the sessions that we do in our year-long engagement with pastors is we are evaluating different things in a church. One of the things is the pastor healthy? That's one session we do. And then the next session we do is the pastor's wife healthy? And we actually work through with the guys about asking the right kind of questions to your wife to just kind of see what things we can do to help them be healthy and feel like I'm really enjoying what I'm doing being a pastor's wife. And so it's not a burden, it's a joy in their life. And we often tell the pastors, hey, sometimes it shows that we care if we simply just care enough to ask, right? Let's just ask the question and then see what we find out. And I'll tell you, the interesting thing about that is that so many times the guys are like, man, I've been married a long time. I think I know my wife really well. But after we ask the right kind of questions, the guys will come back in our next session and we'll be talking about what we discovered And they're like, man, like she answered this question and it was way off of where I thought it was going to be. And so there's usually a light bulb moment somewhere in there that comes on that's super helpful for the wives.
Terry, what do you see in your experience working with church leadership and the pastors' wives, that there have been numerous studies done by Gallup, by Pew Search, by Focus on the Family did one. I can remember reading a few years ago that all give about the same stats that say 75 to 80% of ministry spouses wish that their spouse did something else. That the pressures of being married to someone in ministry, how it impacts them and their home and their children and all of that, that they wish that they did something else. How do you address that when you're looking at the overall health of the church, the leader, and the spouse?
Yeah, I would say this, if and it goes both ways. If you have an unhealthy pastor, it's only a matter of time before you have an unhealthy pastor's wife. And if you have an unhealthy pastor's wife, it's only a matter of time before you have an unhealthy pastor. Because you can't separate those two things. They go together. And so that's why I think it's really important that we focus on what are the things that breathe life into a pastor's wife? And are we making sure that she's getting those things? Because she has a really challenging job in so many different ways. And I think a lot of times she feels undue pressure by the church that she has to be somebody she's not, or do things she doesn't want to do. And sometimes that pressure actually comes from the pastor himself and not from the church. And because I asked my wife when we started in this, I said, do you feel any undue pressure from the church? And she said, there's times I feel more pressure from you than I do from the church to do things. And wow, I mean, that was a dagger in my heart.
Yeah.
It was really good, because I'm like, okay, now we need to talk about that, because I don't want to do that to you, And so I think those honest conversations can just be really helpful when we're talking about pastors' wives.
One of the things that, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think I'm going to need counseling. I think I'm going to have to look at what it means to hire Terry and have some counseling when this is over. Mel's great. My wife, like, absolutely is rock star. And I think some of that, what you've said, is like finding those spaces. Like there are things inherently, like in ministry, it is an odd job. And I think that there are spaces and things that sometimes, when you're a staff member at a church, that your spouses come alongside, and it's not always their favorite thing, but they do some things to serve and be a part. And I totally understand that. But in the last year or two, we've just started to find these really sweet spaces that are Melissa's, like, really strong, passionate points. And it's taken a while to get some of those implemented, but like starting after Easter, she's finally getting to a space where she's brought enough people around that are asking good questions and having good conversations, that she's starting these like women's book groups and working through scripture and doing things that she's able to be, as she and I are right at that 50 area in life, that we're kind of seen as like the grandparent and stuff of some of these younger couples that, they've got young kids and they've looked at our kids and literally they're like, your kids aren't in prison. We feel like y'all are doing a good job. And I'm like, that's a really low bar. So I'm like, we can do something here. But now she's getting to mentor and sit in and love and share with them the truth of what it means to follow Jesus, to be a woman who follows Jesus well, a wife who follows Jesus well, a mom who follows Jesus well, and to really just sit in that space and stuff. And so that was really good. And it's some things that encouraged me that I maybe am a little bit learning. I'm learning just a little bit, to say that more correctly, and listening better to what she's saying and giving her some chances to plug into what she loves and not just maybe what's needed in the moment.
Yeah. Terry, a lot of the guys that I have the honor to work with and sit down and talk with on a regular basis, I can think of four, maybe five right now, that where they're at in their leadership in their church, they have tried for years, multiple times, to lead their church in a new direction, that their church is declining, maybe even on the verge of death, maybe even, sleepwalking through life, just going through the motions. And they have tried. They have developed strategies, good strategies, great strategies, presented them to their leadership. And at first the leadership was on board, but then over time, when they're not seeing the immediate fruits of what they're doing, they either grow discouraged and quit, or just that excitement and that energy from the leadership and from the congregation dwindles until after time it's dead and they're right back where they were before they started. And they've tried this 2, 3, 4 times over the years. And now they're at a place of just resigning to the fact that this is who we are and this is what we're going to be. And I'm just going to ride this thing out. How would you talk to someone like that? How would you encourage a leader in that position that is saying, I've tried it maybe multiple times, and I just can't get the church to follow. I can't get them to be on board or to face any of the barriers and resistance. When that comes, everything shuts down. How would you encourage them to maybe give it another go, to not give up, not throw in the towel?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have guys that we're working with that are in those kind of things too. They're like, hey, we've tried. And I think there's a couple of things. I think number one would be for a pastor to do and maybe do some self-evaluation on where do I need to grow as a leader? Because maybe that, leaders are the lid. So maybe there's some things that he needs to grow in his leadership skills in order to get the church to the next level. And I am all about leadership. I love leadership. We start our whole year-long engagement by focusing on leadership and trying to help the guys grow in areas of leadership. So my first thing would be, hey, where do you need to grow? And if we can grow you, then that's going to translate to growing the church. And I think that would be step number one is, man, let's just look and see how we can get you to a better spot of leadership in leading the church. Then I think step number two is, I think it's really important for pastors, and maybe your guys are doing this or maybe they're not, I don't know. It's really important as you craft a strategic plan to bring your leadership team into the process with you and not just show up and say, here's what I want to try, but let them have a voice in the process. The voice equals value. And when people have value, then they have skin in the game, and then they're more engaged, and then I'm part of the process. And a lot of times I think what pastors do is, this is what we do, right? We think about this all day long. This is what I do as a job. And then we come with this great idea, but they're not a part of the process. So I think working them into the process is a key part of it, making a strategic plan that they will actually be engaged in and excited about being a part of and fulfilling. And so I think those two things, I would say, hey, don't give up. God would want us to do that on his church. But how can we grow you? And then are you working with your leadership team to create the plan so they have buy-in and are excited about moving forward?
That's really good.
What if you're lacking leadership at your church outside of the lead pastor?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
We have several churches that we know of, that we work with on a pretty consistent basis, that in an honest evaluation outside of the lead pastor, they don't have strong leadership. I can think of several churches right now that we work with that their leadership structure, they're elder-led churches. So you have a lead pastor and then you have an elected board of elders, that no deacons in a lot of the churches that I'm thinking about. It's just not in their leadership structure. It's not the way that they're structured. And these are small churches of 30, 40, maybe 50 at the max. Their church eldership So the ones that are really making the decisions in the church outside of the lead pastor, who the lead pastor, the senior pastor, has good vision. They want to see some things change. But the key leaders, one of the churches that I'm thinking of specifically right now has 3 elders in place. The other one has 2, and another one that I can think of also has 3. All of them are gentlemen who are very, very old. They're retired. They're very, very old. Have trouble just doing day-to-day life and have no interest in doing anything other than coming to church and having a place to come and see their friends on Wednesday nights for dinner and Sunday mornings for Sunday school and church. And anything that the pastor says, they're going to be on board with. Okay, so they'll say, yeah, you can do whatever you want. We just don't have the physical capability or the mental capability, honestly, to help you with any of this. So you're basically on your own to do it all. So they have support from the church leadership. Just the church leadership is support in word only. They're not going to be that voice within the congregation to help lead through anything. They're just going to be a bystander and support. When leadership is so critical, how do you lead when there isn't leadership outside of the lead pastor? That was a really long explanation for a very short question.
Yeah, I think that's great, and that's a challenging question. Somebody that has a doctorate could probably answer that. So, Bruce, I'm going to turn that one over to you. How's that?
Well, I think that's a pretty difficult question. We've faced it all our lives, and today you've helped me understand some things. How much my wife was a help in the churches we helped grow. I went and apologized to her for not recognizing it at the time, but I would say find the people who have some leadership potential, and subtly, not just throw them to the wolves, but get them involved in a gradual way with the leaders you have, and just keep telling those leaders what needs to happen, and keep encouraging them to happen. Maybe suggest then those people that you're kind of raising up, that might be people they would suggest that would help with it, and that way they get some sense of feeling of being a part of the process. I think that sometimes when we get people who are older, and when people get older, they feel like they're on the sideline anyway. And if we can find some people who are younger, doesn't have to be an elder, doesn't have to be a man, finds people who have leadership and vision, help them refine their thoughts and ideas, and help them lead, but make sure you don't leave the other ones behind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and certainly words of wisdom from years of experience. And I think it would apply else too, which would be the importance of a leadership pipeline. And I think a healthy church is always looking at a leadership pipeline of who are some people that have potential that we're starting to groom to be in leadership roles when other people have to step out. And again, that's just the job of the leader to go, man, I've always got to be thinking ahead and down the road. Strategy, the word strategy always has the idea of forward thinking and moving. And we keep moving forward as our leadership team gets older. We got to look back for where are the people in the leadership pipeline that we're trying to groom to get there. So that would, for me, again, would be a church health issue. If we don't have anybody in a pipeline that's coming up to take the spots of these guys that are getting ready to step off, then that's not a healthy model of how to do church and really any organization.
Right. And so you need, and still, even though they're not as functional as they were before, you still need them there for their influence and for, in a sense of approval for the rest of the congregation to see that. And I just think that we sometimes go too fast for them, and or we leave them too fast for them. Probably a bad phrase, but we leave them in the dust, and quit planning it with them as much as we were in the past. And so there's a void. Get that void. If you have that void, sometimes that leadership group can so they keep them. I'm really right on. I'm loving what you're having to say today. Right on paper, taking notes of it, and your phraseology is really well done. So I think you guys are doing a great job with your organization. I'm afraid, Tony, I'm going to say something there that we get into that. I'm afraid we're having some problems because I'm hearing blank spit times with us working in our technology here. So I don't know how it's going to come out. But I'm really, really, really impressed with Terry and what he's doing, expressing it. So, and the fact I've preached in Indianapolis and Columbus, and I know where Crawfordsville is, and I've been preached there. All makes me feel good.
Terry, I want to ask you a pretty direct question, if that's okay. Do you think that a church ever gets to the place where it's at the end of its life cycle and revitalization is not possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I might have been willing to say yes to that, other than like I experienced what God did in a church with 20 elderly people, where there were 2 men, no kids, and the rest were elderly ladies, and watched God do a revitalization work. So, like, a church is a little representation of the glory of God on the earth, and I think it's always worth at least giving it a shot to see if it can be revitalized. I'm helping a small church right now that was down to 20 elderly people. They're in a really, really small town outside of Crawfordsville, and they didn't want their church to die. And so we stepped in and we're helping them, and they've gone from like 20 to 40, and we got new doctrinal statement and bylaws that they're going to approve, and we're going to start a new charter membership, so we're relaunching this church. And like, I think it's worth the effort if somebody wants to go in to say, let's see what God can do, because we know God can do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. And so I think it's always worth a try. I always think it is.
I love that. One of the things that we talk about a lot on this show, and it seems to come up about every 3rd or 4th episode, is that when you're in these processes of change, when you're in these revitalization processes, that it's important to celebrate even small victories, that anything that you can choose to celebrate publicly with your church, with your people, that it gives them that little sense of encouragement, of motivation to keep going. Why do you think that it's important to celebrate the progress in the revitalization efforts?
Yeah, so celebration is part of creating a culture. And I would say culture is king, right? I mean, like, every church has a culture, and how you establish a culture is through what you teach, tolerate, initiate, and celebrate. It's part of the culture. And so when there's a culture of celebration where people are doing, it creates the momentum and it builds the culture, and everybody loves to be a part of a good culture, and nobody wants to be a part of a bad culture. And it's why, at Magic Kingdom, you'll pay outrageous amount of money for a day to go, because it is the most magical place on the earth, right? I mean, it's a culture that people still want to be a part of. And so churches have a culture, and culture is either set by design or default, right? You either design what that culture is going to be, or it will default to something on its own. And so celebration is a huge part of designing what the culture of the church is going to look like, so that it will be healthy and something that people want to be a part of.
That's great. I love that. Robert, we haven't heard from you in a while.
I need too many notes. I mean, this has been, again, and we talk about this some. I mean, I am leading a church, so sometimes when we have guests on that are talking in this space and they're really working through some things, my mind is very much in, okay, how do I execute this? How do I shift that? What conversation do I need to have? How do I need to be more intentional in this space? And I think the culture conversation. I was talking with a friend the other day, and we were just talking about churches and just culture, and just talking about two different buildings that we know of. And he said, one of these buildings I walk into, and it's clean, it's nice, and you walk in, and it's good. And he said, in the other one, there might be 6 bugs laying in a corner for 6 months, and he said, I don't know that if somebody walks in and they see that, they're just going, oh, hey, this is really a place that I want to invest time and money, because they don't care. And, it takes more than one person inside of, if you bring that into the church world, it takes more than one person to walk a building every week and see what's going on and find every bug and all the things and all the stuff. There is a culture of caring for your space. There's a culture of caring for your people. There's a culture for all these things, and that's these are good reminders, and maybe some gut punches as well of, hey, I've gotten so busy with A, B, or C that I've neglected the other parts of that in some ways, and just a good reminder of, okay, how do we step forward right now?
Yeah, something that we've been 3 weeks since we've sat down and recorded together, Bruce, Robert, myself, and so I'm anxious to hear. We're going to take a little sidetrack here, and we're going to jump into a segment that we haven't done for several weeks, not just for the fact that we haven't been together for several weeks, but the last couple of times that we've recorded, we haven't done this. And so we're going to jump into Pastor's Picks.
And now, Pastor's Picks. What are we reading? What are we watching? What are we listening to? Does anyone really care? Probably not. But we will tell you anyways.
The reason I wanted to jump into Pastor's Picks right now is because I've been reading a book that I think ties really well into the subject that we've been talking through today. I've been reading a book called Chop Wood, Carry Water by Josh Medcalf. And it talks about this process. And one of the big points of the book is it says, if you want to achieve great things, you have to be willing to fight for it. And that there's going to be battles that come on your way to achieving great things. And as we've been listening to Terry talk today, I've heard a lot of the same themes and ideals that I've been reading in Medcalf's book reiterated through the things that Terry is saying, and just enforced through the things that Terry is saying. So that's a book that I've been reading, Chop Wood, Carry Water, Joshua Medcalf, and a great book that if you want to know more and dive deeper into how you can achieve great things through, he talks a lot about how you can turn monotonous activities into life-changing experiences. And again, just that process that if you want to achieve something great, you have to be prepared to fight for it. Robert, what are you into over the course of the last few weeks?
Well, I mean, me and living in the John Mark Comer, Dallas Willard spiritual formation space, I listen to and read a lot of their stuff. Reading Grochel's book, new book, The Power to Change. I don't think it's actually his new book anymore. I think he's actually got another book that's newer than that. And then we've got a At the Movies series coming up this summer. And so I'm trying to work through a couple of films, and Napoleon is terrible. I don't know that I'm going to be able to finish it. It's just not a good movie.
Not a great movie.
I'm just super disappointed in it. I did watch Roadhouse, trying to watch newer things. I watched it yesterday. It was fine. I mean, I think it's hard to...
Conor McGregor.
It's just hard to come up against. A little bit
too much Conor McGregor.
Not really. I don't care. He's fine with me. He doesn't bother me. It's just hard to come up against Patrick Swayze and Sam Elliott and be like, oh, hey, I'm going to make a great flick. So, yeah. So anyway, there's a couple things that I'm doing, and then always diving through several podcasts.
Why is it? I watched Roadhouse as well, and why is it that every time Conor McGregor is on the screen, he's walking around like he's suffering from hemorrhoids?
I don't know if they wanted him. He kind of walked that way in MMA a lot. And Terry, you're welcome to jump in if you watch MMA and you have a diagnosis on Conor McGregor. But I don't. Yeah, I mean, he kind of acted that way in his Conor McGregor walk. He kind of defined that walk,
and he always had a cheesy smile on his face.
Yes, and until he got it knocked off, and which I don't know. Everybody deserves. I'm just waiting for July. Is it 17th when Tyson fights the YouTuber guy? John Paul, whatever. I'm super pumped about this. I mean, like my boys, it's on our calendar. We've set it aside. Melissa's going to make.
Are you paying for the pay-per-view?
It's on Netflix.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. And so I don't know. We might. That might be one that I pay for. I remember watching Tyson in the 80s. I mean, like watching his fights and going to get something to drink and coming back and the fight be over. I mean, that type of stuff, if you weren't there. So anyway, Terry, what about you? What are you reading? What stuff you're reading or listening to, or your take on Mike Tyson or Conor McGregor? Either way.
Well, I don't know too much about Conor McGregor. I don't have nearly enough tattoos to like get in that world, but man, Mike Tyson, yeah, like I grew up watching him box. Like I am excited to see that thing. And he's 58 years old, but like I still wouldn't get in the ring with that dude. Like I think you could still knock your head clean off. So I'll be watching that one as well.
When we were kids, did people ever sit around and go like, as you got to be a teenager stuff, how much money would it take for you to take one punch from Mike Tyson? I mean, it was just, he was just such a, he changed the culture. Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Anyway, I interrupted you there. Well, you were going to talk about a book or a podcast or a movie or something you're going through right now.
But when it comes to movies, like I'm an Indiana Jones guy, right? So that's the adventure. You can see my little Indiana Jones stuff probably in my bookshelf behind me. So his new movie, I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it was a good ending, and
I thought the new one was really good as well. I enjoyed it.
Agree. Yep, I liked it. Harrison Ford's iconic.
Yeah.
Bruce, are you with us? I think we lost Bruce.
Yes.
I think Bruce is gone.
No, I'm here. Things are breaking up, though. I'm not sure when to jump in. But for me, one of my ex-students in campus ministry sent me a book to read, and I'm reading it. It's called Between Two Trees, and Our Transformation from Death to Life. And I'm just getting into it now, but it's interesting to look at. And as far as movies, we went and saw all of the 3 weeks worth of Chosen, and very impressed with what they're doing, and enjoy it. And my wife's actually helping teach a Bible study here in our new neighborhood on Chosen, and so it's making an impact there. And in our church too, we're about 2 years behind, but trying to keep up with it. So there's several things that excite me that we're doing, and just hearing what Terry had to say today about revitalization and things sounded very wonderful, and it was kind of the things we did when I was younger. And I was just really impressed with what he had to say, and that we use the same kind of principles as we work with people, trying to get them to find growth, to find hope, to find life. And thank Terry for that. It's encouraging. And Terry, when you get the book done, let me know. I'll buy one.
Will do. You'll be the first one. How's that?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And then you can talk about that.
First book sale. That's all.
All right, there we go. All right, so that was Pastor's Picks for us this week.
That was Pastor's Picks.
So, Terry, we're about running out of time. I've got a couple things that I want to get to with you. I've gotten this sense throughout the course of our conversation over the last hour plus here, that this sense of urgency is not something that comes for a season and goes, that it's something that needs to be present continuously. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would say so. Especially for churches that are stuck or status quo or in decline. It's something that if it's not there, nothing's going to change.
But I would say even for a church that's doing great, that they need to continue that's when you get stagnant and declining, is when you lose that sense of urgency.
Yes. Well, I think every church, it needs to be in continual sense of evaluation, right? Like where can we do better? Where are we not healthy? Where can we be more healthy? I think that's absolutely a part of the strategy of every church, to do the evaluation, because the culture is always changing around us, meaning that what we did, well, let's take this. What we did prior to 2020 and COVID looks different than what we do now post-COVID, because the whole culture changed, the whole world changed. And so culture always changes. And so the church has to continue to look at, how do we keep up with meeting the need of being missional to the culture that we live in today?
I love that. And how do they do that? How does a church keep that sense of urgency? And not only for the pastor, but how can the pastor or the key leaders of the church inspire their church members to constantly live within that call to revitalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all part of, every church needs to have a clear and concise mission statement and core values, and just things that you revisit all the time. And I know, like, for our church here at Rock Point, I'm still on the staff, even though I'm not the lead guy anymore. Our vision statement is we want to be a healthy church that multiplies healthy churches. And so that's always kind of out in front of us. We keep that in front of our people. What does it look like to be healthy? If we ever get unhealthy, then we can't multiply something that's healthy. And so I think that mission statement, those core values, they need to be clear, they need to be concise, and they need to just be talked about on a regular basis from the pulpit, in elders meetings, in deacons meetings, whatever that structure looks like, to go, this is what guides us. Are we still doing this? And it helps churches stay missional.
I love that. So Terry, you have several hundred listeners to your show right now, or to this show right now. What would you want to say to a group of a couple hundred pastors, few hundred pastors that maybe are listening to this show and are maybe at a place in the life of their church where everything that you've talked about today has struck a chord with them? If you had the opportunity, which you do right now, to sit down and say one thing to them, what would that be?
Don't give up. Mm-hmm. The mission is too important, right? We're not talking about whether or not we're going to close a donut shop or close a laundromat. We're talking about a church, and that has eternal ramifications. And I love the story of Joshua when they had the big victory at Jericho, and then they got defeated at Ai, and so things were hard, and he was the new leader, and all of that. And Joshua 7:10 is one of my favorite leadership verses, because you would think God might show up and show him some compassion and some gentleness and all of that. But Joshua is on his face before the Lord. Joshua 7:10, God shows up and says, "Hey, Joshua, what are you doing down there? Get up." And it's like the leader can't crumble, or the people following you are going to crumble. The leader has to lead. And so don't give up. Stay the course. Be the leader that God called you to be, and be strategic and move it forward. Be missional. There's a lot at stake with our churches. We can't have them closing the doors across the country. There's too much at stake for that.
That's great. Terry, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they wanted to find out more about what you're doing and talk to you more about some of the things that you've discussed?
Yeah, so it's real easy. smallchurchusa.com is our website, and you can get a hold of me there, or my email address is terry@smallchurchusa.com. So either way is a really easy way to get.
Wonderful. Well, that is about all the time that we have for this edition of the Small Church Podcast. Want to send out a huge thank you to Terry Thompson from Small Church USA for being our guest today. If you have loved what he has had to say, why don't you hop on to the Small Church Podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share your comments, your feedback help find others to find our show, and we would love for them to be a part of this community. If you would like to talk more to Terry and find out how he can help you in your church, visit him at smallchurchusa.com or email him directly at terry@smallchurchusa.com. I want to thank you again for being a part of this episode, for being a part of this growing community. Again, we want to encourage you to interact with us on social media. Find us on Facebook, higherministries.com, or visit us on our website and chime into us there. We appreciate you listening. Have a great rest of your week. On behalf of Bruce and Robert, I am Tony Marr, and thanks for listening to this edition. All right.